The Zorkai warship, Bloodfang Eternal, drifted alongside the human colony vessel like a predator shadowing prey. Its jagged silhouette dwarfed the fragile human craft, a reminder that the galaxy had long learned to bow before the Zorkai Empire. At the heart of that empire stood Queen Vaylith, taller than any of her warriors, armored in glistening black carapace, her crested crown etched with the scars of 1,000 battles. She was feared, worshipped, obeyed. Her enemies knew her name as a curse. Her subjects spoke it with reverence. But today, she was not the conqueror. Today, she was a mother. 2 hatchlings scurried at her side, their scaled hides still soft, their claws untested. They were the daughters of a queen, princesses of the Zorkai, though to Vaylith they were simply her little ones. The humans had insisted on this meeting, a gesture of peace, a fragile attempt at diplomacy. And though Vaylith did not believe in peace, she allowed it. For if nothing else, she wanted her daughters to see the galaxy their mother ruled. The human captain greeted them with stiff politeness. His voice trembled despite the translator chip smoothing his words. "Your Majesty, we are honored, truly honored, to welcome you aboard." Vaylith's eyes glowed a predator's gold. "You will be honored to survive this day, Captain. Do not waste my time with hollow flattery." The captain swallowed, nodding quickly. Behind the queen, the hatchlings skittered and chirped, their attention already wandering. One tugged at her mother's arm, pointing with a claw at the strange machinery lining the walls. "Mother, what are these?" "Human toys," Vaylith said with a rumble. "Fragile things. Break one with your tail if you wish." The humans stiffened at her words, but the princesses only giggled, their crests flicking with amusement. They were curious creatures, far more curious than she had ever been as a child. Perhaps that was the gift of being born into an empire, already carved by conquest. They did not fear the unknown. For a time, the tour continued without incident. Humans explained their ship's design, stammering their way through descriptions of hydroponics, habitation modules, and engines. Vaylith listened with the patience of a predator toying with prey. And then, in a moment too quick to notice, her daughters were gone. At first, she thought they had merely darted behind her legs, chasing one another as hatchlings often did. But when she turned, the corridor was empty. A silence fell over the group. Vaylith's crest flared. Her claws dug into the metal floor, scoring it with deep gouges. "Where are they?" The human captain paled. Majesty, they must have wandered off. We'll find them immediately." Her roar shook the ship. "You dare lose the blood of my line? You let my daughters vanish in this fragile shell of metal?" Zorkai guards raised their weapons, eyes blazing with fury. Humans froze in terror, hands raised. The tension in the corridor thickened like smoke. Vaylith towered over the captain, her voice a venomous hiss. "If a single scale on their hides is harmed, I will slaughter every breathing soul aboard this craft." The captain stammered something, but the queen had already turned away, her soldiers surging through the corridors like a tidal wave. The Basai humans scrambled to assist, their voices crackling over comms as they organized search parties. The hunt had begun. The colony ship was vast compared to its fragile crew, a labyrinth of narrow halls and modular compartments. Every door was thrown open, every storage bay searched. Zorkai warriors tore through human quarters, ignoring protests. Vaylith's voice thundered through the ship's intercoms. "Return my daughters, or I will tear this vessel apart with my own claws!" Human children cried in fear. Adults whispered prayers, Marines readied rifles, though they knew it would mean nothing against the queen if she decided to unleash her wrath. And still, the hatchlings were nowhere to be found. Hours seemed to stretch into eternities. Vaylith stalked the engineering deck, her massive frame hunched beneath the too small ceiling. Her soldiers moved methodically, but with every empty room her fury deepened. One of her generals approached. "Majesty, we have found no trace." "Then you are blind," Valeth spat. "My daughters are not ghosts. They are here." And then a voice, nervous, trembling. A human medic stood at the far end of the hall, his face pale as ash. "Your Majesty..." His hand shook as he pointed toward a small maintenance bay. I think we found them," her heart thundered, in her chest. Without a word, she stormed past him, claws clicking against the floor. The door hissed open, and there, on the floor of the maintenance bay, lay a human. A man in grease-stained overalls, clearly an engineer. He was slumped against the wall, fast asleep, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. And upon that chest, curled together in a heap of scales and tiny claws, were the daughters of Valeth. The hatchlings were nestled against him, purring in soft trills, their crests resting against the fabric of his uniform. One clutched the human's shirt in her claws as though it were a blanket. The other nuzzled her snout against his heartbeat. They looked utterly content. The room went deathly still. Jorkai soldiers tightened their grips on weapons. Humans froze in fear. No one dared to move. Valeth herself stood motionless, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. Her daughters were safe, unharmed, sleeping soundly, but why? Why were they clinging to this human? The man stirred, blinking blearily awake. His eyes widened at the sight of the queen towering above him, her soldiers bristling with rage. His voice cracked. "This isn't what it looks like?" The hatchlings chirped in protest at the sound, one pawing at his chin as though to hush him. Valeth's claws dug into the steel wall, gouging deep scars. Her voice came low and dangerous. "Explain, human." The man swallowed, his atoms apple-bobbing. I didn't mean any harm. They were just wandering. They looked cold. I guess they liked the warmth." He gave a nervous shrug, as if unsure whether he would live to finish the sentence. "So, they climbed onto me, and then they just fell asleep." Silence. The queen's soldiers shifted uneasily, awaiting her command. By all rights, this man should have been ripped limb from limb for daring to touch the royal line, and yet her daughters stirred, pressing closer to him, their tiny tails wrapping around his arm as if in defiance of anyone who tried to separate them. They had chosen him. For the first time in centuries, Queen Valeth felt something she could not name: confusion, reluctant awe, a flicker of respect. The man swallowed again, his voice barely above a whisper. They just needed someone warm. And in that moment, the queen of the Jorkai, the scourge of half the galaxy, the terror of empires, did something no one had ever seen. She laughed, not the cruel, mocking laugh of a conqueror, but the deep, trembling laugh of a mother who had feared the worst and found instead something she never expected. Perhaps these humans were not so weak after all. The Jorkai soldiers pressed in around the maintenance bay, their blades drawn, their golden eyes blazing. They were moments away from tearing the human apart. And yet, two tiny hatchlings, daughters of the queen, lay upon his chest as though he were the safest being in the galaxy. Their crests flicked softly in sleep, their scaled tails curled tight around his arm. The silence was unbearable. At last, Queen Valeth broke it. Her voice was low, dangerous, thick with fury. "You dare place your filthy hands upon the blood of my line?" The human stiffened. He had the decency not to move, lest the hatchling stir, but his eyes darted nervously between the warriors. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I didn't..." His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "I didn't touch them. They came to me." One of the Jorkai generals snarled, stepping forward with his weapon raised. "Majesty, give," The word, and I will sever his limbs. He defiles the royal brood simply by breathing in their presence. Valeth's crest flared. The easy answer, the natural answer, was death. That was the Jorkai way. But her eyes dropped to her daughters. They were not afraid. They were not even awake. They trusted this creature. She hissed softly, a sound that silenced the entire room. Not yet. The general froze, his blade trembling with the desire to spill blood. Valeth crouched low, her massive form folding with surprising grace until her golden eyes were level with the humans. She studied him for a long moment. His scent was different from the others, less sharp with fear, more warm, earthy. "What is your name, human?" she demanded. The man licked his lips nervously. Daniel, her mandibles twitched. A strange, plain name. No honor, no title. Just Daniel. "You will explain," she said, her voice vibrating the metal floor. "You will tell me why my daughters cling to you as though you were their clutchmate." Daniel gave a helpless shrug, careful not to dislodge the hatchlings. "I don't know, Your Majesty. They wandered in here. I was just doing maintenance on the life support panel. Next thing I know, they were climbing on me. I thought they'd scratch me to pieces, but..." He trailed off, looking down at the two small forms nestled against his chest. His voice softened. "They just wanted warmth, comfort. I guess I reminded them of something." Something flickered in Valeth's chest, a pang of memory, sharp and unexpected. When her daughters were first hatched, they had clung to her heartbeat the same way. The sound, the warmth, it calmed them. But this was no mother. This was a fragile, soft-blooded alien. And yet her daughters purred. The generals demanded action. "Majesty, he must be executed. It is blasphemy. Allowing this thing to live will shame the empire. The brood will be tainted by weakness." Their voices clamored in the chamber, echoing off the steel walls. Humans lingered at the periphery, tense, knowing one wrong word could spark a massacre. Daniel said nothing. He just held still, letting the hatchlings rest. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He only stayed. At last, Valeth raised one claw, and silence fell. "Remove my daughters," she commanded. Two warriors stepped forward. The first reached out to take the hatchling from Daniel's chest. A shrill hiss erupted from the little princess. Her tiny crest flared wide, her claws snapping forward. She struck the warrior's hand with surprising ferocity for one so young, leaving a thin line of blood across his armored hide. The second hatchling pressed herself deeper into Daniel's chest, letting out a distressed trill. The warriors froze. The entire chamber went still. The daughters of the queen had rejected the hands of her own soldiers, yet they clung fiercely to the human. Valeth felt her breath catch. Her eyes narrowed. This was no mere accident. This was choice. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Please, don't force them. They're just scared. Let them decide." The audacity of the words stunned everyone in the room. A human, speaking to a queen as though she were an equal, telling her what she should do. Her generals bristled with fury. Weapons rose again, blades gleaming. But Valeth's hand shot out, stopping them with a single gesture. Her eyes locked on Daniel's. There was no arrogance in his voice, no defiance, only honesty. He had no idea he was still alive only because. His words rang true. Valeth lowered her head closer still until her mandibles brushed the human's collar. He trembled, his breath ragged, but he did not flinch. "You are fragile," she said softly, her voice like molten steel. "One strike of my claw would end you." Daniel's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "Yeah, I figured that out already." Her eyes narrowed. "And yet, you do not beg." He gave a tiny shrug, careful not to disturb the hatchlings. If they feel safe here, then I've already won more than I deserve. The room was silent again. Even the hum of the ship seemed to fade. For a long, dangerous moment, Queen Valith simply stared at him, and for the first time in centuries, she did not know what to do. The days following the incident in the maintenance bay became the most precarious in the history of the human colony vessel. Daniel hadn't asked for the role thrust upon him. He hadn't asked to be noticed by anyone, let alone by the fiercest monarch in the galaxy. All he'd wanted was to fix a misfiring oxygen scrubber and get back to his quiet, uneventful routine. But now, every step he took was shadowed by golden eyes, by the weight of history, by the impossible warmth of two little alien princesses who refused to leave him alone. The hatchlings followed him everywhere. When he rose from his bunk, they were curled beside him. When he worked at the engine manifolds, they scampered along the pipes, trilling at every spark of light. When he ate, they watched curiously, sometimes mimicking his gestures, other times snatching food from his tray, with tiny claws before chirping mischievously, and always, they returned to him when they grew tired. Curled into his chest, pressed against the steady rhythm of his heart. It didn't matter that the Zorkai generals considered it blasphemy. It didn't matter that the human crew eyed the hatchlings with barely restrained fear. The princesses had chosen, and once Zorkai made a choice, nothing short of death could turn them away. The tension simmered. On the human side, whispers spread through the ship. The monsters are using him as bait. They'll kill him when they're done. If he angers the queen, we're all dead. Daniel heard the mutters when he walked the corridors, saw the nervous glances, felt the distance growing between him and his own kind. On the Zorkai side, the disdain was sharper. Warriors muttered that he was unworthy, a parasite clinging to the royal brood. Some spat openly when he passed. Others reached for blades, only to halt when the hatchlings bared their teeth at them in tiny, high-pitched growls. Daniel didn't fight back. He didn't know how to. He just kept walking, kept breathing, kept trying to survive another day. But Queen Valith noticed everything. The queen summoned him to her chamber. It was not a throne room, not on this vessel. It was a warlord's sanctum, walls lined with trophies from countless campaigns, skulls of beasts, banners of fallen empires, blades still stained with the rust of ancient blood. At the center stood the queen herself, towering, radiant, terrible. Daniel entered hesitantly, the hatchlings perched on his shoulders like armored birds. Valith's golden eyes narrowed. Again, they cling to you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, I noticed. Her mandibles clicked softly. Do you presume to know why? Daniel shook his head. I don't pretend to understand them. Maybe it's just instinct. Kids, hatchlings, they know who's safe. A low growl rumbled from her throat, though it wasn't quite anger. Safe. Do you think yourself safer than a queen? Daniel met her gaze, trembling but steady. Not safer. Just different. I'm warm. I don't smell like blood and iron. Maybe that's enough for them right now. The queen leaned closer, until her massive crest shadowed him. Or perhaps you have bewitched them. He swallowed. If I had that kind of magic, do you think I'd be a maintenance tech scraping by on broken pipes and faulty wiring? For a heartbeat, silence reigned. And then, to Daniel's astonishment, the queen's mandibles twitched in something dangerously close to amusement. You are bold, she said softly. For a fragile thing. The hatchlings chirped happily at the sound of her voice, reaching toward their mother. But when Valith extended her claw, they ignored it, burrowing tighter against Daniel's neck. The queen's eyes softened just slightly. They have made a choice. And in that moment, Daniel realized it wasn't just the hatchlings being tested. It was him. Not everyone was pleased. Whispers turned to schemes. Among the Jorkai generals, dissent festered like rot. General Kor, a hulking brute whose carapace bore the scars of 100 battles, snarled his discontent before the others. The queen falters. She lets a human, a prey species, taint the brood. This weakness will poison the empire. Others muttered agreement. Some dared to suggest removing the human quietly, an accident in the corridors, a weapon misfired, but every plot ended the same way, with the hatchlings' fierce loyalty. To harm the human would be to risk their wrath, and in turn, the queen's. Still, the whispers grew louder. It happened during a routine systems check. Daniel was crawling through a narrow service conduit, hatchlings scrambling after him, when the ship shuddered violently, lights flickered, alarms blared, his comm crackled with panicked voices. Hull breach! Sector 12! Life support compromised. Containment fields failing. Evacuate! Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew this ship inside out. Sector 12 wasn't far. And worse, it housed the primary atmospheric pumps. If those went down, the whole colony ship would suffocate. The hatchlings squealed in alarm as the corridor tilted, gravity fluctuating. Daniel grabbed them instinctively, clutching them to his chest as he crawled forward. The breach wasn't sabotage, he realized as he moved. It was stress. The ship had never been meant to dock alongside a Zorkai dreadnought. The gravitational pull alone strained its hull. Something had finally given way. He reached the control panel just as the emergency. Doors slammed shut, sealing him inside with the damage. A thin, terrible hiss filled the air. The sound of atmosphere leaking into the void. The hatchlings clung to him, their tiny claws digging into his uniform. Their eyes were wide, frightened. For once, they didn't look like the heirs of a galactic empire. They looked like children. Daniel's heart pounded. He had seconds to decide. He could save himself, trigger the inner bulkhead, and retreat. Or he could try to patch the breach, risking everything. He didn't even hesitate. "Hold on," he whispered, pulling the hatchlings close. "I've got you." The breach was small but deadly, a jagged tear along the conduit wall. Daniel ripped off his jacket, pressing it against the gap, his hands freezing as the vacuum tried to pull the fabric away. He fumbled for his toolkit, teeth chattering, and activated the patch foam. The sealant hissed, spreading across the fabric, hardening into a temporary shield. The pressure stabilized, barely. Daniel slumped back, gasping for air, the cold biting into his skin. The hatchlings chirped anxiously, pawing at his face, their crests pressed to his chest as though to reassure him. He managed a shaky laugh. "See? Told you I've got you." That was how the rescue team found him minutes later, slumped against the wall, pale and shivering, but alive. The hatchlings nestled safely against him. The queen arrived moments after. Her golden eyes blazed. As she took in the scene, the frozen human, the patched breach, the daughters clinging tightly to his body. Her generals expected rage. They expected her to declare him reckless, unfit, expendable. Instead, she strode forward and crouched low, her massive claws surprisingly gentle as she brushed a hatchling's crest. "You risked your life," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on Daniel. He managed a weak smile. Seemed like the right thing to do. For the first time, Valith did not see a fragile human. She saw courage. She saw loyalty. She saw strength of a different kind. She rose to her full height, her voice echoing through the chamber. "This human saved the royal brood. His life is no longer his own. From this day forward, he belongs to the house of Valith." Gasps rippled through the gathered warriors. Humans stared in disbelief. Daniel blinked, stunned. "Wait, what does that mean?" The queen's golden eyes glowed. "It means, Daniel of Earth, You are now guardian of the daughters of the Empire. And in that instant, his life changed forever. End of Part 3. The halls of the Zhorkai royal citadel echoed with sounds that had never been heard there before. Laughter. Not the harsh, mocking laughter of warriors boasting of conquest, but the light, unrestrained joy of children at play. 2 hatchlings scampered down the corridor, their claws clattering against obsidian floors polished by centuries of blood and triumph. They trilled and chirped, chasing one another around the carved pillars of their ancestors, until they tumbled into the waiting arms of a human. Daniel caught them with a grunt, staggering slightly beneath their growing weight. The princesses squealed, their tiny crests flicking in delight as they curled against his chest. "You two are getting heavier by the day," Daniel muttered, shaking his head with a tired smile. "Pretty soon I won't be able to lift you." The hatchlings ignored his complaint, nuzzling into the warmth of his uniform, purring with contentment. It had been 3 cycles since the incident aboard the colony vessel. 3 cycles since Daniel had patched the breach and earned the Queen's decree. 3 cycles since his life had been torn from the routine of a maintenance technician and thrust into the storm of galactic history. Now he lived in the heart of the Zhorkai Empire. A human among giants, a guardian among warriors, and though he often felt like an insect among titans, he had never once been alone. The princesses adored him. They refused to sleep without the sound of his heartbeat. They mimicked his speech, their sharp tongues tripping over soft human words. They begged him for stories of Earth, though Daniel had none that sounded grand beside the Zhorkai epics of conquest. Still, he told them about quiet forests, about oceans that stretched forever, about rain that smelled of earth and thunder. And somehow they listened with rapt attention, eyes wide with wonder. He became more than a guardian. He became their teacher, their playmate, their comfort. But not everyone celebrated this bond. The Zhorkai court was a den of blades hidden behind smiles. Generals muttered that the queen had grown weak, permitting a prey species to nest beside the royal brood. Advisors whispered that Daniel's presence tainted the daughters, filling them with softness instead of steel. Plots festered in the shadows. General Kor, the loudest of Valeth's critics, did not speak his treason aloud in the queen's presence. But his followers grew bolder with every passing cycle. They saw Daniel not as a guardian, but as a threat, a fracture in the unyielding armor of their empire, and like all fractures, they intended to break it wide open. The storm came on the night of the Ascension Rite. The great hall blazed with firelight, shadows dancing across the towering statues of past rulers. Warriors knelt in ranks, their armor polished, their blades gleaming. The queen presided from her throne, the princesses seated proudly at her feet. Daniel stood behind them, awkward in ceremonial garb that felt too heavy, too foreign. He had no place in this spectacle. He knew it. Every glare from the generals reminded him. But the princesses refused to be parted from him, so he stayed. The rite was meant to reaffirm the queen's rule, to remind the empire of her strength. Instead, it became the stage for betrayal. A tremor shook the hall, subtle at first, then violent. Cracks split the marble, fire pits toppled, filling the air with smoke, and from the shadows of the upper balconies, armored figures leapt, blades gleaming, eyes burning with treachery. Assassins. The court erupted into chaos. The princesses screamed, curling against Daniel as the first assassin lunged. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. The assassin's blade slashed where the hatchlings had been, but Daniel had already thrown himself across them, taking the strike along his arm. Pain flared, hot and blinding, but he held firm. "Run!" he shouted, though his body pinned the princesses close. "Stay behind me!" Another shadow descended. Daniel swung wildly with a ceremonial staff torn from the floor, striking the assassin's helm with a desperate crack. The warrior staggered back, shocked at the ferocity of a human's blow. Daniel stood his ground, blood dripping, breath ragged, hands trembling, yet he refused to move aside. The princesses huddled behind him, their tiny claws clutching his legs, their eyes wide with terror but shining with trust. And in that moment, Daniel understood. He wasn't just their guardian. He wasn't just a human caught in the tides of fate. He was their shield. The assassins never reached the hatchlings, because when the queen saw her daughters shielded by a bleeding, fragile human, when she saw his courage blaze brighter than the firelight, something inside her snapped. Her roar shook the hall, a sound of pure wrath and primal fury. She launched herself from the throne, claws flashing, fangs bared. The assassins faltered. They had expected weakness. They had not expected the storm. Valeth tore through them with a ferocity that would be carved into legend. Blades shattered against her carapace. Blood painted the floor. When at last the hall fell silent, the only sound was the ragged breathing of the queen herself. Her eyes found Daniel, still standing, still bleeding, still shielding the brood, and for the first time in centuries, she felt something other than conquest. She felt gratitude. When dawn broke, the conspirators lay dead. General Kor had fled, his rebellion crushed before it began, and Daniel stood before the throne, bandaged but alive, the princesses clinging to his hands. The court awaited judgment. Surely the queen would punish him, cast him aside, reclaim her daughters into the fold of tradition. Instead, Valeth rose, towering, radiant, terrible, and spoke words that would shake the empire. This human has bled for the blood of my line. He has stood where warriors faltered. He has proven loyalty beyond all doubt. From this day forward, he is not prey, he is not servant, he is kin. Gasps rippled through the hall. Warriors stared in disbelief. Valeth's golden eyes burned with conviction. Daniel of Earth is guardian of the princesses. By his courage, he is bound to the house of Valeth. Any who raise blade against him, raise it against me. The hall fell silent. No one dared speak. The princesses chirped happily, nuzzling Daniel's hands, their trust unbroken. And Daniel, still trembling, still unsure how he had come to this place, looked up at the queen and saw for the first time not just a ruler, not just a conqueror, but a mother. Thus ended the rite of ascension, and thus began something new, a fragile thread of trust woven not from conquest or fear, but from the unlikeliest bond in the galaxy, a human heartbeat.